Evening and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to a conversation about agriculture. This town hall is brought to you by Mia Mason for Congress and No Dem Left Behind. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our special guest tonight, Mr. Gary Wegman. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat or into the comments and we'll address them as they come in. Before we get to introductions, I'd like to start with a focusing activity to get everybody's mind in the right frame. First off, we're going to answer the question, what is the biggest issue facing agriculture and farmers? So if you can go ahead and respond to that in the comments or the chat, we're going to go ahead and answer that question. I'm going to start off by introducing our special guest, Mr. Gary Wegman. Gary has dedicated his life to serving his community. As a dentist, as a farmer, as a father and husband. He was raised on a working family farm in the Ole Valley where he learned to live the values of hard work, fair play, and equality. As one of the few medical professionals running for Congress, Gary knows our healthcare system inside and out. Throughout his 36 years as a dentist, Gary has watched as career politicians have broken our healthcare system. As a small business owner, Gary has balanced budgets, made payroll, and created jobs in our region, and at his medical practice and on his farm. While serving on the board of Redevelopment Authority, Gary worked to successfully redevelop and renovate blighted properties and a brownfield site. As chairman of the Reading Park Authority, he oversaw public parking facilities and helped to manage public resources effectively for the community, a trait career politician in Washington could learn from. And also, I'd like to give a brief introduction of Mia Mason, our other host for tonight. Mia is a 20-year veteran who served in the Army, Navy, and DC National Guard. She retired in 2018 and shifted her focus to advocacy and fighting to restore equity and equality back into our communities. She's running as the Democratic nominee in the 1st District of Maryland. And Mia, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you if you wanted to start us off by answering what is the biggest issue facing agriculture and farmers.
I think the biggest issue that I've seen is the changing of hands. Either it's going to corporations or it's going to out-of-state owners and out-of-country owners because a lot of industries have shifted. They've gone away from either cattle, chicken, or they're basically turning their farms over to solar. So those are some of the main issues that I've seen and heard from our local farmers. How about you, Gary?
Yeah, it's my answer would be trending along the same line, and I think it's something that the public really needs to worry itself about because we've had antitrust laws that really represented who Americans are for 100 years. We pushed back against the fossil fuel industry, and right now we're seeing a monopolization of agriculture, where big agribusinesses, industrial businesses, are owning the production, the distribution, and the sales of the agricultural products. We're down to maybe 4 meat processing facilities nationwide, and recently in Pennsylvania, a company called Dean Foods, which used to buy whole milk from a lot of our small dairymen in Pennsylvania, dropped its contracts with over 200 farms. If you don't think that hurt me, that was really painful for the Pennsylvania ag community. And the reason Dean Foods dropped its contracts to purchase milk from our farmers was because Walmart dropped its contract to buy from Dean Foods to stock its stores. Walmart decided, hey, let's cut out the middleman. Let's just raise our own livestock in the Southwest where it doesn't freeze, so we don't have to build barns to cover them. Pipes don't freeze, so they can pipe out the manure rather than having to haul it. And they just have a lower overhead provided everything goes well. But we've seen in the past a swine flu wipe out a whole hog market. And I just think having a diversified food chain where we have smaller farms in the mix, bigger is not always better when it comes to agriculture. And I think we need to start electing representation in Congress that are going to push back against the big agribusinesses of the Southwest and Midwest and make some room for the small farmers to still survive.
I agree, because some of the big things like Tyson and Purdue have proposed is cutting out the labor. And we can provide on the legislative slide grants to provide more technology to make things more automated. However, the companies have decided to basically freeze products, ship it overseas to be processed, and then resell it back to us here in America without much of FDA oversight. So that's a big major concern that we have to be able to handle in Congress.
Yeah, and I'm not going to sell our workforce down the river like that. We're going to protect them at the border if companies try to do that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Gary. I think that the vertical integration of farms is a really big issue that you touched on, and that I'd really like to explore more. It looks like we got some answers from the audience coming in. What is the biggest issue facing the agriculture business and farmers? We have inconsistencies of the market because of changing government policy without consideration of smaller farmers' input, and climate change affecting insect pollinators and predators. I mean, both great points as far as agriculture goes. Did you guys want to touch on any of those?
Yeah.
Well, I think that even with it takes time to grow things. It's just not overnight, and policies change faster than what a farmer can buy for seed, plant, fertilize, make sure that it's growing properly, survives a drought, and is able to be harvested on time. The majority of our farmers still have crops in the field right now that they haven't been able to harvest because it's been a late harvest this year.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
climate
and
change.
I would echo the concerns with our pollinators because a lot of pesticide use that's indiscriminate can really adversely impact some of the essential insects that we need to do the work in the field. And we have to learn a little bit more about the side effects of some of the products that are being put on the market.
Yeah, because I've seen so much new technology to even automate pollination by bees, and I'm like, wait, we're gonna have nano bees flying around, and I'm like, who can afford this? Our farmers can't afford it. So it's just the way technology is changing, while also killing off the insects that actually do the work better than a machine can.
Absolutely. And with all of these issues that are facing agriculture and with farmers, what can be done on a federal level to actually help our farmers out? Gary, I'll go ahead and let you start off this one.
Well, I think one of the big things that our representatives have to assume is the role of champion for the ag community. And so we have to really get to know the issues on the ground of our ag sectors. Where I'm running in the Pennsylvania 9th District, agriculture is our biggest industry in the 9th District, and we're hurting. Our dairymen and everybody else took a big hit with the trade war that was begun 2 years ago when commodity prices were slashed. That was the only money they were counting on making. That was the profit that got taken off of them, off the sale price of soy and corn, soybeans and corn, the day that opening salvo went forth to the Chinese. So we have to look at fiscal incentives we can bring to the farm. In Pennsylvania, we have a large dairy sector, and we could use some cheese and yogurt processing facilities. This would give living wage jobs to people and help soak up some of the excess milk supply that we have here in Pennsylvania. We also need to look at descheduling marijuana. I don't want to get into the whole, do we legalize recreation or not, but by taking it off as a Schedule 1 narcotic, we have a problem because we want to grow this hemp plant, which is kind of a cousin to the cannabis plant. But right now, the law says it can't be more than 0.3% THC content. And certain conditions, rain and sun, can really make it difficult for farmers to contain that. If we deschedule the plant, period, then we wouldn't have to have that issue be such a hard one for farmers to comply with. It's very onerous, and they could have their whole crop destroyed for a very insignificant reason. So we want to look at that. I think we have to evolve away from fossil fuel power on the farm, and we can do that with electrification of some of our machinery, and also just leverage technologies, GPS technologies, and everything else to use more efficient equipment to maximize, the production that we're doing.
Yeah. I think you're leading into a great point here, because many of our farmers, even here on the Eastern Shore, they don't have internet. They're lucky to even have, direct TV to provide internet. And then it's more like DSL dial-up speed. So having new technology, can help them. They can spend money on satellites, and they need the money to be able to know when things are happening, and they need real-time imagery in order to do that. Those are things that they have to be able to pay for. But when they can't even like get online to go to Google to learn how to do this, that's a big issue. And then, of course, the other thing that is striking farmers a lot is the age of their equipment. Majority of the time, it is time to get maintenance done. And when you have to then drive it to a dealer, put it on a trailer, take it to them, pay for them to diagnose it, then pay for them to fix it, and then pay to have somebody deliver it back to your farm, you can just go to an auto parts store or go to the dealer and order the part. If you're able to self-diagnose these mechanical issues or software issues, and this leads into what is a right to repair. Big thing that farmers are getting stuck with is we have advanced technology over the last 10-20 years that we've put into these machines to make them very advanced, but then it's causing a biggest maintenance cost burden for our farmers, which is cutting into their profits and their livelihood just to keep a machine alive than keeping their livestock alive. So having a right to repair is super important so that they can continue to keep their maintenance up, allow them to continue to have harvest, and make things a lot easier so that they can get their product to the next person down the line in the distribution. Because overall, this administration also is telling us that they want to, get rid of our regulations on what is organic and what isn't organic. And when you take a look at the grocery store and you see what is organic, it costs more because you pay more. And hopefully that goes down the line directly to the farmer who has that certification. But if Trump wants to get rid of them all, we need to be able to just reverse this and make our farmers more profitable.
If I could follow up, Mia,
Yeah.
when you started talking about the aging equipment that farmers had, I thought you were going to talk about the aging bodies that farmers have and the need for maintenance on that. Because once you get over 50 or 60, it starts getting tough doing some of the stuff you just took for granted on a daily basis. I know my back feels it. Two other points that I would be remiss not to mention. One, we talked about previously on the first question is our roles as congressional representatives in antitrust legislation and to make sure that we're pushing back so that the farmers, small farmers, have a fair playing field. And the other thing that we've done to the dairy industry and to our agricultural sector in general was maybe 8 years ago, we changed the milk regs in public schools and took whole milk out of public schools. And I'm of the mind that if we're talking about a half a pint quantity, whether it's 97% fat free or 98 or 99% fat free, I don't think it's clinically significant. If you're drinking a gallon a day, yeah, you might have a point. But for kids in school drinking a half pint, I think that maybe we could put whole milk back as a choice. Doesn't have to be the only option, but it should not be removed. This really hit our dairymen hard, and I think we have to have another look at this.
Yeah, because the fermentation of milk is pretty simple when you're making whole milk. It's when you have to start adding more lipids or acids or and more water to dilute the product, which really doesn't make it profitable for you. It just means that you have to store it longer and then hopefully ask for people to buy it. And that's a big disadvantage. So adding whole milk back to schools in your area, I think would be an amazing thing to happen.
And we're learning that saturated fats may play an important role in our youth as their immune systems are developing. So it may just be a benefit to have there. You and I have been around long enough, Mia, to hear. I've heard that eggs weren't good for you, and now they are. And butter's not good for you, and margarine's better. Oops, no, it's butter that's better, and margarine's no good. So
Same thing with
sometimes a
honey.
little bit. Say that?
Same thing with honey too.
Yep. Yep. But we need to keep an open mind and maybe start selling moderation.
Absolutely. It's all about moderation. Let's see it. Going into a little bit more of our first question, the biggest issues that are facing agriculture. We got some responses back from our Twitter poll. Looks like the number one answer is climate change, followed up by monopolization. I was wondering if you guys could kind of touch a little bit on how you would address these issues from the federal level.
Well, from a pollution standpoint and climate change, I think we have to start looking at incentivizing our small farms to work together. Farmers are fiercely independent, but there are some economies of scale that can be gained by a couple local farms in the same vicinity pooling their manure together and creating a methane digester, which could generate energy for those local farmers to use on their farms. So it becomes a more cyclical use of energy rather than to have to pull energy off the grid. And it takes the methane out of the atmosphere and puts it back into energy use for that immediate farm cooperative. I think it's a great idea, but it's a little bit expensive for one farmer to do for themselves. But if we can put 4 or 5 farms together that are within the same 2 or 3 mile radius, that could work. That could be something that could work well. I also think, we've done a good job of educating farmers on crop rotation. You don't have to talk about crop rotation to farmers. They get it. They want to keep their soils healthy, vibrant, and alive with as much vital biomaterial in it as possible because that gives them the best nitrogens for the best growth. But we want to minimize herbicides and pesticide uses. We talked a little bit about this with our bee populations and our pollinators. And I know myself, you haven't felt this down in Maryland yet. Well, maybe you have. But we've been battling the spotted lanternfly up here for about 6 years now. And we have targeted leafhopper sprays, and we don't have to use a broad spectrum pesticide to take this pest out of our vineyards. But we can't leave it there or it'll kill our vines. It won't hurt the fruit. It'll kill the plant for the next season. You're done.
Yeah.
So that's an issue up here in Pennsylvania. I mentioned earlier about fossil fuels too. We want to evolve away to more electric engines, and I think that's something whose day is coming. And maybe just improving, as Mia mentioned earlier, our efficiencies of leveraging the internet and broadband and GPS technologies. And broadband, I'll let Mia talk about that, but that's a huge issue for our rural communities. I heard, Mia, today, I heard somebody talk about an estimate of $80 billion to be able to install fiber optic for broadband connectivity throughout America. 80 billion. But actually, there's another option here. So I'll shut up and let Mia talk, and we'll come back to it.
Well, you brought up some good points, so I'm just going to caveat them for Maryland. So the little bug you're talking about is in 4 of our counties. We do targeting for that. We do have notices out in every town hall to make sure if they see it, they report it. The other thing that you talked about the internet is like in Cecil County, we have 650 miles of fiber optic cable that's going to get installed into our rural areas starting in 2021. But when you take a look at our current representation and you see what Cecil County got, which has a lot of farmland and not a lot of internet, they got $14,000 out of this deal. I mean, that's basically maybe a mile or 2 of fiber optic cable. And when you're up in Fair Hills or Rising Sun, that's not going to go anywhere. That may be a span of maybe 20, 30 poles, and that's it for $14,000. Because I know for installing a mile of cable, it's around 10 grand. And that's just for an urban, community. But I think for all the climate change that is happening here, we can absolutely see about making sure that we enforce the Clean Air Act for these large factory farms. They produce enough to make their own power, like you talked about. So we need to make sure that those livestock systems are ecologically sound, improve the soil health, and basically try to squash that carbon so that they're net neutral. That would really help them out. As far as a small farmer, you know, they can probably piggyback and help these folks by actually saying, hey, look, this is how I've done it for thousands of years. I know you're a corporation, you got big bucks, but you can't just dump your pollution down into my waterway. So this ties into us as city councils and chambers of commerce to make sure there's actual drainage infrastructure, to make sure that there's a way to process all of this waste so it doesn't go into our river and it doesn't go into our Chesapeake Bay, because this will really affect not only our fishermen's lives, but of course the shores for where the crops are growing. We don't want to see it solidify and then just go out into the water because of rising sea levels. So those are many things that we have to be able to do, provide the grants for, make sure there's technical assistance for making sure they understand exactly what they're doing with crop rotation for the new folks. Because if they came from Pakistan or Afghanistan or India and they're trying to grow here, they're used to growing on a quarter acre or less to feed their family. Here in America, it's like 26 to 50 acres depending on the size of your farm. And if you only have 10 acres, to somebody that's from another country, they're going to cut and divide that up into quarter acre slots so that they can reduce the bug infestations and put in irrigation and everything else, which is what they're used to. But here in America, it's a completely different rule book, and it's big swampy patches with big irrigation systems. So we need to also understand that when they buy these farms and they start up, that they don't immediately go into debt. And I think providing them a debt relief is a lot better because normally they're bound by insurance providers who basically protect their farm for each type of crop that they want to grow. But that in itself costs as much as the seed sometimes.
Yeah, I'd like to, since you brought it up, one of the things we've learned, I've always been a big fan of Thomas Jefferson, but one of the things, Jefferson did a couple things that didn't turn out so well. One, he's really the culprit who brought the phylloxera pest to the French vinifera and almost wiped out all of French's Premier Cru Class Bordeaux over 100 years' time after he came there because he brought it with his seedlings from North America. But he also developed the moldboard plow. And because of moldboard plowing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s with tractors in America, we were turning our soils every year to plant. And this eroded a lot of topsoil, which ended up in the Chesapeake estuary. So if you want to send our topsoil back, Mia, we'll take it back because we need it. But in all seriousness, the farmer has learned he doesn't want to lose, or she doesn't want to lose her topsoil either. So we got into chisel plowing, and then we got into no-till farming, where we don't even turn the soil from crop year to crop year, and we're learning to rotate crops and put nitrogen back into the soil by using different cover crops. So we're getting a good education and doing. Believe me, the farmer goes to college. The farmer gets an associate degree. Today's farmer has a lot to learn because he's working and she's working on such slim margins that they can't afford to mess it up. And Mother Nature fights back hard. So you've got to really follow your weather and know what you're doing. We're planning on harvesting fruit. We have wine grapes that are ready to pick. Well, they're not quite ready to pick, but we're going to pick them this Thursday because we got a confluence of different patterns happening here that we want to get it in before we don't get it at all. But I wanted to mention that, and there was something else, but I lost it, so it'll come back later.
I think I can answer it since we're thinking alike here. We have to also make sure our Customs and Border Patrol prevent that from happening. Because if you order anything from Wish.com or eBay or something, you may end up getting a lot of seeds from China instead of the actual material. So what should somebody do if they receive a package with seeds in it from overseas?
Well, I think what they should do is turn that into their farm cooperative, to one of their extension agents that are working in their community and get advice from them before they open up the package.
Yeah.
Or before they dump out the package anyway. They open it to find out what's inside, but if they know it's seed that they didn't order, they want to find out more about it first, for sure.
Yeah, because the one thing that they shouldn't do is put it in the trash. So they definitely need to be able to call their local enforcement agencies on a federal level because I'm pretty sure the sheriffs and police won't be able to do it. But if you take it to, your local FBI or your co-op, they'll be able to help develop a case on these shippers and sellers who are sending seeds to America, which will actually protect our lands and protect our crops from either further damage from our new landfills that are being turned into brown sites and then made into fields, or protect our local communities from people just planting it in their backyard.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the other thing I wanted to mention, Mia, is we were talking about broadband, and
Yeah.
uh, SpaceX has launched these Starlink satellites to low orbit, and they're hoping to use those within the next year and a half time, I'm told, in North America to roll out broadband connectivity to rural America, particularly North America, right here in Maryland and Pennsylvania, that our rural communities can buy broadband that's as fast as fiber optic, but without having to put in the infrastructure. The thing I'm worried about is, and you alluded to this earlier, it does no one any good to have broadband connectivity if you can't afford to pay for it. So what's it going to cost? It sounds like it's going to be much less expensive using satellite technology rather than having to put in the fiber optic cables and all the manpower and materials that go along with that. But by the same token, satellite technology isn't cheap either, and people are going to have to pay. Where's the money going to come from if they're already operating below cost for their what they're raising and growing? So we've got to have a conversation later on in this virtual town hall about real wages for our ag communities to be able to survive.
I agree. I think we will definitely talk about that. So, Lauren, save that. Actual wages for our farmers. And, because normally a farmer is also the mechanic, the technical expert, the person with the degree, and then has to turn around and cook dinner, cook breakfast, and then get sleep during the day so that they can continue farming at night. And you were talking about broadband, and I have to be able to say that a long time ago, it wasn't even broadband. It's called iridium satellites, and basically it was your cell phones before we actually had wireless phones. So rural broadband can also be wireless, but to put that infrastructure up, you're looking at, for an access point, $200, and then the tower, another $15 to $5,000 per tower. And if you add more nodes on it, which directions are you going to point to? And you can get up to maybe 5 gigahertz and 5 gigabytes of data, but the thing is that it costs even more. And where will it go? Who has access to it? Who's going to maintain it? And this is why it's probably easier to just put it in the ground, so we don't have to worry about the changing climate. So that's why broadband is so important. But to actually get it installed requires the Federal Telecommunications Act to make sure that it does happen. And I think if we get in the Congress, we can make that happen.
With you.
Excellent. So I did want to kind of circle back around to climate change because that's such a pressing issue for a lot of people. It's on a lot of people's minds. I mean, I know for us on the Eastern Shore, Mia, it affects everything, especially for agriculture and farmers. So John from Facebook asks if we can talk more about the issue of water. So I kind of want to tie that into our next question, which is how can we reduce the pollution from the agriculture industry? Being so close to the Chesapeake Bay, obviously, there's a lot of pollution that's occurring and it can be linked to the farms. So Gary, I'm going to go ahead and have you start us off with this one.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see us do these methane digesters. I think that's a big help for farms that have livestock. That's something that's relatively new technology. Also, we're looking at diversifying our crops, and the hemp plant could be a game changer for America. Hemp really pulls up a lot of pollutants out of the soil wherever it's planted. So it can be planted in some sites that were former brownfields areas where there was reclamation done for sites that had lead or something like this. And this plant can really pull that stuff out and still be used for its fiber to be put into hempcrete, which is a building construction component or insulation, which is non-flammable, or even the auto industry wants the hemp fiber because bioplastics are a lot more flexible, they're stronger, but they're also 30% lighter than fossil fuel plastics. So this translates into fuel efficiency. So when it comes to the hemp plant from a pollution and green economy and climate change perspective, this is a game changer for Pennsylvania and Maryland. This stuff grew here 200 years ago. We have writings from Ben Franklin lauding the great hemp fibers that are grown here in our area in southeast Pennsylvania and northern Maryland. And the reason it grows here is due to the slightly acidic soils that we have and the temperate climate. The problems that we have is we don't have leadership from our legislative congressional branch to bring the processors to the farm communities to take this plant and change it into these injection mold pellets that can be used by the automobile industry or the manufacturing sector, et cetera. So we need a champion in Washington to lead these issues and bring the financial incentives. We've heard of opportunity zones in our urban sectors to get some revitalization of blighted areas. We need to bring some economic vitalization monies into our rural communities and incentivize some development there for these green issues.
Very
I'll let Mia take it from there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Mia, big question. How are we going to protect our waterways from the pollution of the agriculture industry?
Well, I'm going to talk about 4 different counties because they all have different issues. One kind of goes into the Atlantic Ocean, one goes into the Chesapeake Bay. Berlin has a infrastructure problem where basically, depending on the tide and normal rain, you could end up going into a poop street, and that may have a lot of agriculture waste in there, and that needs to be able to get fixed. For Somerset County, a lot of it is below water. In fact, it's allowed a lot of salt water to come through, and it's basically desalinized the natural protection that farmers need from wind and from heavy rains and storm surges. So we see a hollow forest of trees that are dead and starting to become petrified. And of course the shore there is also going below water. So this brings us up to Dorchester, where around Church Creek, if it's high tide, you're not going to get home, and you don't need to water your farm. The Chesapeake Bay waters it, but if it's polluted, you can't really trust your crop. And then of course out in Kent, they can't help themselves to bring everything up to code. So they rely on the businesses and the farmers to basically put in the infrastructure for the water, bring everything up to code. So these are where we can provide funding from the federal to make sure that they get the grants, to make sure that we enforce the Clean Air and Water Act to protect our Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean because of these aging infrastructure problems. And of course, the rising sea levels that maybe need to be even have bulkheads and other seawalls to prevent liquefaction. Because I'm going to be sharing about a town hall that happened the other night in Queens Anne and Kent County about them basically losing their waterfront park. I know it's not a farm, but still, that's a big concern, and it's part of their tourism and their natural habit to have a place to enjoy themselves, have festivals and live music. So when the farmers are recreational, they have a place in the city to go to spend time with their family. So to make sure that their water is clean is also about making sure that that infrastructure and processing is done. And if we have to be able to, I'm not calling on John Oliver, but he's also trying to buy a sewage plant. So if others are looking to help us, influencers out there, help our towns, help our communities, help protect our Chesapeake Bay, and fund it. We need to be able to help others. So with the state's AGs, we've sued the EPA to help protect our Chesapeake Bay. And we need to be able to go back into the Defense Act and also the national budget to make sure that the EPA is always fully funded so that we can protect our water, protect this Chesapeake Bay, because it's also a place that we fish and we do recreational and grow crops. So I think it's super important that we complete those parts.
You know, Mia, up here in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of freshwater lakes that were constructed by our Army Corps of Engineers 50 plus years ago that we all very much love to use for fishing, for recreation, boating, etc. But because of climate change, there's a lot of salt water pushing up the Delaware River from the Chesapeake inlet, and they're talking about now tapping into some of our freshwater uh, dams to push water down the Lehigh and the Delaware from upstream to push this salt water back into the Atlantic Ocean. It seems like that may be necessary as a short-term option, but that's treating the symptom and not the problem. Okay. And our problem here is climate change, and we need to start looking at what we're doing on a daily basis. So I implore everyone, I'm drinking potable tap water, and that's what everybody else should be drinking, particularly in their own home. We all have very healthy water, and we're very fortunate here in the Northeast. We have plenty of rainwater. We're not hurting for fresh water in the Northeast, but we have to become good stewards of it and manage it properly and not be wasteful of it. So I'm pushing back on all my peers that are drinking way too much bottled water. It's not necessary. I don't buy the fossil fuel industry that wants to put in now. They put one out in Western Pennsylvania. They want to put one up along the Susquehanna River in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, where they want to build a brand new plastics fabrication facility. We need to consider bioplastics made from hemp and corn. We don't need to consider it from fossil fuels. We also need to start looking at what we're drinking and how we're storing it, and come up with more cyclical strategies for our waste management, rather than throwing everything into the landfill that doesn't get composted. We were told plastics were going to be recycled. We've been recycling plastics for the past 30 years plus, but they haven't been recycled. All we do is collect it, but it doesn't actually happen. We've been lied to and hoodwinked, and we've got to start getting smarter than this and start using products that we know will break down over time, rather than the fossil fuel plastic.
I completely agree with you. That's the beauty of hemp. That's why we need it. And glad you're drinking water. You know, anybody that also drinks like those big liters of water, you know, I look at them like, okay, and then you stick a flavor packet in it. I was like, why didn't you just buy the flavored drink? But here's the thing. We also understand that a lot of corporations are sucking up aquifer, you know, in order to fill those bottles of water. So they're taking natural spring water, or they're taking water from the lake and buying it from the city on, you know, the millions of liters per year, but it's not being replenished because of climate change. This needs to also get changed. And I know it's a state issue, but if the federal government needs to be able to step in, I think we should be able to help.
It's all part of climate change, and we need to get back into Paris and go from there.
I agree.
Absolutely. And thank you guys. That's honestly the most important issue to me is climate change. Now moving on to a separate issue. How has the trade war with China impacted the industry and farmers' livelihoods? And I think that we can kind of lump in living wages and kind of farmers' livelihoods all together with this question as well. Mia, I'll go ahead and have you start us off.
Well, I understand that Maryland has had a big cash crop. It was soybeans. You know, a very small percentage actually went to China. But when you're dealing with, you know, NAFTA, the TPP, and other things that are happening, China plays into a part because it can also get put on a rail and sent to the West Coast, and it's cheaper to send it to China. Having this big impact of sales go from like 16 billion to just 6, that $10 billion was sure profit that was lost. That means there was a lot more dead crops full harvest bins that basically weren't getting sold, or none of it being put on ships to get sent overseas. And here in Maryland, majority of our products that are for farmers, they go to Europe, Africa, South America, even to Canada. And now it was basically kind of cut short. So it really hurt everybody as a farmer when they needed to sell something, which has really led to the highest number of bankruptcies that we've ever seen here on the shore.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, Mia, we lost 19% of our farms in Pennsylvania in 2018. They just went out of business. And then in 2019, another 11% on top of that. So if you don't think this is going to eventually impact our ability to feed America, we need to wake up.
I
And
agree.
you know, we're probably at fault for producing more than we can consume. We have such a surplus of products that we're a victim of our own success. We can do this so efficiently compared to the years past that we've increased our productivity to such a degree that we have all this extra product. And so this is another justification for bringing the hemp plant into the product mix of our agricultural communities, because all the markets that want to consume products made from hemp can be controlled right here in the United States. We've got seeds from hemp that can be used for cattle feed. We've got textiles that can be made from the fiber. We've got building products, whether it's hempcrete or insulation for the building trades. We've got automobile parts from injection molded fiber pellets that can be used to do quarter panels and hoods and trunk lids, etc. And there's also CBD oil that we also have a big demand for that can be used in some health products. So a lot of those, and all those markets I just named, doesn't matter what Malaysia wants to do, what Vietnam's doing, what China's doing. We control all the demand and supply right here in our own country. So, but we're not processing it, so we can't capitalize on it. The Europeans, the Canadians, they're putting this in their automobiles already. They're ahead of us. We got to catch up. We got to get smart.
I completely agree. And until we get into office, we need to be able to understand and tell our farmers exactly how this hemp product is going to work, because they understand that if they sell something, they're going to get taxed on it. Well, this tax actually will go back to our farmers. It will go back into our Medicare system and provide them a UBI. In my plan, I want to make sure that they have a universal basic income. So they don't really need to rely on the seasons. They really don't need to rely on everything else, or profits, or the markets, or Twitter, because the president decided to go at them. We need to make sure that our farmers have stability, just like our teachers, our healthcare professionals, and it may have to go to a universal basic income so that we can actually make sure that we start to get back into that market and succeed. Our country's in a recession and it's not looking anytime good. You can think that the stock market's going up and up and up, but it may come down very hard on us very soon, and we have to be ready and provide something to provide an incentive and stimulus by making sure things are legal for our farmers so that it starts, because we're tired of the trickle down effect. We need to be able to make this work from the ground roots up. That's why we're running for Congress.
Lauren, please keep Mia Mason in Maryland. If she comes up to Pennsylvania, she'd be so popular with what she just said. I wouldn't be able to beat her. I mean, farmers would be all lining. You'd be their champion. But that's exactly right. We need to value our ag communities and make sure that we're paying them a living wage. And we'll get into this in a moment, but just one last comment on this China trade embargo and battle that we're in here. Nobody argues the fact that we needed to call out the Chinese. They were flouting the WTO, and we needed to make sure that they were following the rules like everyone else. But whenever you go into battle, you line up all your allies with you and you take in your strongest team, and you use the PAL doctrine where you go in with overwhelming force so that they know who has the power. And we needed the Argentinians and the Australians and the Brazilians and the Canadians and the European community with the Americans locked elbow to elbow and going with our ag communities and saying to the Chinese, now, you need to feed your people. We're going to change what's going on here, or you're not getting any of this from us. Okay? And until we solve this problem. And I think the pushback from the people in China, they've been known to starve their people. I get it. But, you just can't do that to billions of people. They needed the products that we had to offer. But instead, we sold out the American farmer and left all these other agricultural communities capitalize on our misfortune. I just thought it was a real poor strategy. It's not rocket science here. I don't understand why intelligent people like Larry Kudlow and Richard Lighthouser, why this was ever allowed to be embarked upon without linking up our allies first. It makes sense to me.
Well, they were in it to make a quick buck because they knew that they could short it or sell it or buy more of it in order to make a quick buck. That's how the stock market works. If you control the source of information and then feed it out, you can make money. So that's insider trading. It needs to be looked into.
They did, but the farmer got thrown under the bus.
Yep.
And yet the farmer still in Pennsylvania, they still want to vote for these people. They need to pay attention to what's going on.
Because can they survive another 4 years of this administration cutting them directly in front of their fields and basically hanging them out to dry?
Well, let's talk about what we can do on a local level here, me, and see how we can help them.
That's our next question. What do you think, Lauren?
Absolutely. I wanted to go ahead and wrap us up by asking you guys, what can people do to support farmers?
Well, I think that buying local is kind of the nice thing. You're out there on that drive Monday through Friday, take a detour, find your local farmer. They're out there in their SUV or with a display or at their local produce shop, before they sell to the big market. Buy directly from the farmer. I think that would really help because then you actually see the product that you're actually buying with the person who has actually grown it. And of course, here in Maryland, we want to make sure that we are proud of what we grow here. So if you want to be able to support the brand, make sure it's with Maryland. I'm pretty sure there's also brand awareness out in Pennsylvania so that you can actually grow your product there, have it branded that it came from Pennsylvania instead of somewhere from overseas. I think that is super important by making sure that we support our local farmers and then fight and lobby to make sure that they have a right to repair. Help us get these laws passed so that we can have hemp, rural broadband, and more. So I think that's just a tip of the iceberg. But if one person can do one thing, maybe somebody else with a different passion can help us. So, Harry, what can you say?
Well, I had all those points that you brought up, that and advocating to bring whole milk back into schools. But I really want to just paint a broad brush stroke picture here. And for everybody in the audience who thinks this is far-fetched, this is how it was 50 years ago or 75 years ago. People came into our schools at 6 o'clock in the morning and started dicing vegetables and making soups and stews and stocks from chicken and poultry products and whole foods. And they made meals for lunchtime serving, made from products bought from local farmers. We have local grains that can be milled locally and made into breads. We could have school district wide or multiple school district wide bakeries that did nothing but buy local grains milled locally, and they were given living wage jobs to bake rolls and buns and breads for the school district, for all the schools within the districts in the cooperative. And then we had employed people, gave them living wage jobs to come and work in the schools and serve and prepare whole foods. Guess what? Not as much obesity. We didn't have the diabetes that we have today. And who knows what effects that has on our immune systems. But the backside now is we have to subsidize our farmers because the farmer isn't selling it to the school anymore. He still has to pay all the school taxes, but it's going out to the Midwest and it's getting repurposed or out of the country and then brought back by Tyson and Cisco and back into the schools and heated up in the bag. And then the bags go into the landfill, and the farmer has to be subsidized because they're not made a living wage. And the kids are more obese and they're having more issues with diabetes. So healthcare costs go up. And maybe instead of school boards voting for the lowest dollar product, maybe we want to look at the quality of what we're feeding our kids and show them a signal that this is how you prepare a meal. Because the youth of America, anybody 40 years or younger, a lot of them don't understand how to cook from scratch. And they just have grown up in such a pizza and PB&J mentality that they've lost the art of making food that's actually healthier for you. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I did want to paint that circle because it was that way at one time, and I'm not so sure that we've actually progressed in how we've evolved, and maybe we need to go back to the future.
I completely wholeheartedly agree, because this whole pandemic has taught us something, how to cook, because so many people have relied on those restaurants, and even the restaurant industries have suffered because our farmers, basically were cut under the bus again because those restaurants weren't open. And we need to be able to make sure that people know how to cook. And they're out there buying every type of processed food. I remember like when I was a young little girl and making sure that I was in high school, that home economics was kind of important. Listening to my grandmother and learning how to make things from scratch was super important, because you might just be left with raw ingredients in the grocery store, and I remember most of those recipes. So having to go to the grocery store and not seeing food, and providing a weekly grocery report for toilet paper, paper towels, and everything else, all that's kind of processed. Well, how can you make it yourself at home? You got to think like a farmer and actually do it yourself, and it's called hard work and labor. So even John in the comments says he can't even catch a chicken now. But I remember my grandmother being able to just pull a chicken, wring its neck, and then start cutting and plucking. And that was fresh fried chicken. So that is honestly the way things were. And if that's happening like it was in the schools before they went to coolies and pizza, and your mom saying, well, it's too expensive to feed you at school, so here's PB&J and hot dogs, mac and cheese, we need to be able to change that mindset again, that whole foods are super important. And the most important section in your grocery store that's the healthiest for you is the produce section.
There you go. Buy local.
Absolutely, guys. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to mention before we wrap up here?
Lauren, when I was in second grade, so we're talking circa 65, I made my mom come to school and talk to the head cook in the elementary school that I went to, which was just 4 classrooms. And I made her get the cook's recipe for coleslaw, because I liked the cook's coleslaw at school better than the coleslaw my mother was making. Now, my mother's now 87 years old, and occasionally I'll visit her at home, and she'll say, "Oh, Gary, I made some of Mrs. Bain's coleslaw. It's still in the fridge if you want some." Think about what child asked their parent to come to school with them because they want the recipe from a food product that's made at their school. I mean, this is just ancient history.
I know.
We need to think a little bit more about the signals we're sending to our youth by how we're feeding them, and at the same time, really big time, help the farmer, because as Mia said, let's pay him a living wage up front. And we've got the breadbasket of America right here in Maryland and Pennsylvania. We should be leveraging that for our communities and eating like kings all the way up and down the age brackets.
Yep, completely agree, because even like when you go to Costco's or Sam's Club, it's about making sure that they also buy local, because there's huge distribution centers. So your Walmart, Walmart, or whatever, they should be able to just buy from local sources. It's nice to see when you drive down the road and you see a farmer and their brand is there in Walmart. Their brand is there in a Costco or Sam's Club. Their brand is in a giant Food Lion, Aldi, or whatever, because it was made here in the United States. So that's super important for us to be able to support our farmers.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to thank you guys both for coming out tonight, and thank you to everybody else for watching. And with that, we're going to wrap up for tonight. So have a good night, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for doing this, Mia.
You
Thank you,
too.
Laura.
Thank you, Gary.
Yep, no problem.
Okay.
Well, welcome back, y'all. I forgot all about this most important thing. So, Gary, how can people know about you, find you on social media, and support your campaign?
Thank you, Mia. My name is Gary Wegman, like the stores, Wegman, and they can find, I have a lot of videos and podcasts on my website at GaryWegmanForCongress.com. That's Gary Wegman for FOR Congress.com, or to visit my Facebook page. We streamed this live tonight, and you can find other interviews and content that I did in the video section there, and look for upcoming events. I'm running for U.S. Congress in Pennsylvania's 9th District. That's east of Harrisburg, south of Scranton, and right near Pottsville and Lebanon County are in our district. Schuylkill County and the northern part of Berks are in our district, along with Columbia County, which is where Bloomsburg University is. Kutztown University is in Berks. We have a lot of schools in my district, but a lot of rural communities. So we're real happy. Oh, at Dr. Gary Wegman on Twitter. I would be remiss not to mention that you can follow our tweets. So,
And
very
what
good.
upcoming events do you have, if you have any?
Well, we have a No Dem Left Behind virtual town hall coming next Tuesday. I think, is that the 13th? Is that Tuesday?
The
I believe that's
13th at
what-
8 p.m. Yep.
And we're doing a car rally on Sunday in Schuylkill County, starting at my office in Tamaqua, my campaign headquarters in Tamaqua, and we're going to take a car rally through about 13 or 14 different boroughs and communities in my district, and go slowly through the boroughs, hand out lit if anybody's on the street, and let people know that we're running for office, make a little noise. We can't go door to door, so we're going to try something a little bit different. And that's happening this Sunday from 1 to 3 p.m. I also have interviews up from the League of Women Voters in Berks County right now. We're going to be doing a debate with my opponent with the Schuylkill County Chamber of Commerce on October 22nd. So that'll be something live on Zoom that any constituents of Pennsylvania's 9th that are watching this can join in on October 22nd. And I believe I have one on October 20th also on WVIA, which will be another interview, another debate format with my opponent. So Mia, thank you for giving me the opportunity to promote myself here. But the most important thing is for everybody to exercise their right to vote, learn who your candidates are, go to our website, GaryWegmanForCongress.com, and Mia, make sure they know yours, and get informed about who's running here and why we're running, and make an informed decision for this coming election. It's so critical. We cannot allow a 2016 to happen again.
I completely agree. So thank you, Lauren, for making sure that you host us, and we're very sorry to our audience that we completely forgot this section. But here's the thing, we're human. We're just like you, and we're trying to represent you. So I'm Mia Mason. I'm running for Congress in Maryland's 1st District. It goes from the hills all the way to the shore, out to the ocean. So that's Carroll County all the way to the Delaware border, down the eastern shore, down to Ocean City. It's so big, it has 3,000 square miles of basic shoreline And I often refer to it as the size of two Delawares. So, as the Democratic nominee, I want to make sure that you can find me. So, it's Mia for MD. And of course, miadmason.us is where you can make your contribution tonight. And I want to let everybody know that we're going to be getting out the vote. Rally is coming up very soon with Townsend Dems. And we have some special guests. We even have members from our coalition. And as Gary said, next week, October 13th at 8 p.m., we're all going to be together to explain to our voters why they should be voting for us, because you should be informed of exactly what we're doing. And be sure to check out this weekend and other weekends for Riding with Biden, because we're going to be going across our district to make sure that our voters are there. And if you ever see a honk and wave in your Facebook events, be sure to invite a friend, because it's about making sure we are heard and we see the signs of us out there and we're impressed. There's less Trump signs than I've ever seen, and our numbers are 2-1, and I'm excited for Joe, Kamala, and myself.
All right.
So with that, Lauren, anything else you want to say before we close out again?
Absolutely not. I feel like you guys did a great job covering it. Thank you again for joining me, for allowing me to host this wonderful town hall to discuss a very important issue to our rural communities, which is farmers and agriculture.
Awesome. Go hemp and go farmers. Have a good night.